Excellent. I'm
All
just going to
right.
pop open the chat window as well,
All
just
right.
for my own purposes. Here we go.
Okay. So
Okay.
hello. I'll do. Hello and
Absolutely.
welcome. Hello and welcome to the 13th annual Wild Wisconsin Winter Web Conference. I am Jean Anderson with the South Central Library System, and I am moderating the Reference and Readers Advisory track. Assisting me this afternoon is Angela Schneider with the Winnifox Library System, and we are glad to have you here. Our presenter for this session is Carol Hassler, Access Services Librarian for the Wisconsin State Law Library. She will be presenting legal reference, sources, and strategies. Carol will take questions throughout the presentation, so go ahead and add your questions anytime into the Q&A panel or into chat, and we will pass them along. So Carol, whenever you are ready, go ahead and take it away.
Absolutely. Great. So, my name is Carol Hassler. I am a librarian at the Wisconsin State Law Library. I have been at the library for 18 years, closing on 18 years, and have answered a very large variety of legal research questions at this point. I got my start in public libraries, so I love reaching out to public librarians. For our library, we do quite a few services for public librarians. That includes fielding questions that you may have when you have a question at your desks. And also, you can send patrons our way and we can help them directly as well. So, in today's webinar, we're going to talk about some quick tips to get you started with legal research. And then we're going to spend most of the time surveying some of the books and websites that we often use at our libraries when answering reference questions. So it's not unusual for us to get a lot of questions from users about some nebulous fact or answer they found in an online advice site or law site or in an article on the weirdest laws. You never quite know where information that a patron has is going to be coming from. And one of the biggest hurdles when you're getting started with legal research is to juggle the list of potential sources. So this word cloud shows just a handful of our most asked questions. We get a lot of family law questions like divorce and child custody, a lot of landlord-tenant questions. So I'm happy to dig into those specifically during this webinar as well. The Wisconsin State Law Library website, wilawlibrary.gov, started compiling legal links in the late 90s. It's still a quick resource to jump to laws or find research tutorials. We actually created it for our own librarians' use as kind of a shortcut to helping people find information or helping ourselves find information. And it still actually fulfills that function. We encourage you and the people who visit your libraries to reach out to us with questions. We are located in Madison and Milwaukee, but we help people all over the state. So, helping people remotely is actually a large amount of what we do. We help a lot of people by phone, by email. We can scan information from our books or send information from our collection that may just not be available in some areas of the state that don't have access to a law library. We can also help people by guiding you to free online information and forms. As you can imagine, the area of law is huge and there are a lot of potential sources to dig through. So let's start with some general reference sources. For a public library collection, you might want to make sure you have access to Wisconsin statutes. Of course, those are available online. You may want a legal directory, although a lot of legal directories are no longer being printed commercially. So you actually are kind of forced to go online for that. I'll talk about that at the end of this first segment. Other things that you might want are self-help legal books. This webinar has sections on family law, landlord-tenant, estate and probate, consumer law, and criminal law. It's just the tip of the iceberg. Always reach out if you have additional questions. We are going to talk about some of the differences between state materials, published materials that are targeted towards attorneys, and we'll talk about some of the materials that are published targeted towards self-represented litigants, people who are representing themselves, or general members of the public. So, understanding primary and secondary law sources is really important. This is a term that we throw around quite a bit. Agencies or boards can publish decisions. Courts have local court rules. Professional associations may create codes of conduct, or entire codes of law can sometimes be adopted and enfolded by reference into our other laws. So there are a lot of potential sources to find the law. A lot of these are available online, with the exception of some things like fire codes can sometimes be commercially published and included in the law by reference. So if you ever run into something like that, where it's a little bit hard to find the text of the law, certainly reach out to the law library here. There are a lot of sources of online information to help. So you can go to a law library website, including ours. The University of Wisconsin and Marquette can also be helpful. They all have research guides as well on general legal research as well as specific topics. For both Wisconsin and other states' laws, the American Association of Law Libraries Legal Research Toolkit, which is linked here at the beginning, has a quick guide to frequently used Wisconsin sources, and it also has a general guide here in their public library toolkit on how to do some basic collection building for your collection. So if you're looking for some specific pointers or just to get you started, this public library toolkit, the collections section in particular, has some good guidance on the types of resources you should look at and the qualifications that you should consider when you are thinking about purchasing something. Okay. So while you can always go online, you can also add state-specific research guides to your collection. This is one example, one of the more recent Wisconsin legal research guides out there. It walks people through the general process, and it's actually just a great key to help people understand what the primary sources of law are. Law librarians might break down their research into primary and secondary law sources, and we don't necessarily go straight to the online statutes. We don't necessarily go straight to the law when we're first given a question, because if you've ever read the law, it can be very dense. It can be hard to track sometimes, especially if it's referencing other sections of the statutes. So sometimes it's easier to jump into what we call a secondary law source or a book or an article, something that summarizes or examines or otherwise grapples with the law in a way that's more readable for people. So this page on our website, our Wisconsin Law page, is almost completely just links to different primary law sources for state and local government. Gives you a good idea of the types of things we're talking about when we talk about primary law in Wisconsin. We subscribe at our library to some online research sources. So public librarians, if you weren't aware, are eligible to sign up for a state law library card. You can do that through our website. It's under the services menu. And that state law library card lets you check out books if you are at one of our library locations, but it also lets you access our card available or remote research databases. So if you have a library card, you get personal access to use these remote databases as well as our remote ebook collection. If you do need to sign up for a library card, we just ask that you use a work email address and phone number so we can better identify your place of work when you sign up. So databases include our Lexis Digital ebook collection, which includes an excellent book on Wisconsin employment law. And Hein Online is also a vast resource with a lot of sources of primary law. Our legal topics research pages go back or got their inception in the late 90s, and they include links to a lot of relevant laws. We also link to guides and forms from either government or nonprofit organizations. Here is a general source that can be used for understanding what's available for legal purchasing or legal book purchasing. The last edition of this book, and maybe the last ever at this point, was released in 2021, so it is aging every day. But it is a great source for an overview and analysis of legal books available under a specific topic or a specific area of law. It can be something that's very specialized, probably doesn't fit in a lot of library collections, but we do have this book here. And I know I'm screen sharing, so you probably can't see much, but I've got it here. Nice thick book. Has a lot of great information about decision making for legal purchases, legal book purchases. It gives you a good overview of the different kinds of publishers you can take a look at if you are thinking about bulking up your legal collection. And this is something that you can contact us and we can scan some pages from to share with you by email if you don't have access to it. So it is a nice resource just to learn more information about how to do legal book purchasing. The next slides are just some examples of general legal reference books. We're not going to spend a ton of time on these. This slideshow is partially to talk about or talk over, and partially as a resource for you to take a look at later. So these prices that I've included should all be fairly accurate, but I will say that as I was updating this slideshow, I did see several books with large price increases. So that is something to consider or be aware of as you're thinking about making these purchases, is that if you are referencing this slideshow later, it may not be completely accurate in terms of pricing. So Guide to Citation just helps people understand how to cite the law or to cite legal sources, specifically in a blue book format, which is a legal citation format. There are a lot of different types of legal encyclopedias, and these can be incredibly helpful resources. We call them encyclopedias, the Pleading and Practice series, the Wisconsin Practice series, because they give a broad survey or legal analysis or even sample forms on a variety of topics. They are also, unfortunately, very expensive. So you can contact us for help searching these books. We do help people with this remotely from time to time. There are also online sources for legal information. Those two at the bottom, Cornell Law Institute and NOLO or other law-related sites, do have some good resources. Cornell has some good general overviews in their legal encyclopedia. They summarize very basic concepts, but it's not specific to Wisconsin. And NOLO is a publisher you've probably heard of before. You probably have at least one of their books in your collection or in a system collection. And they're a legal publisher that's geared towards self-represented people. They also have a lot of articles on their website on common topics, things like car accidents or divorce or rental problems. It does run a lot of ads and chatbots advertising attorney services, so be ready to navigate around those. Here is an extract from one of those legal encyclopedias. This is in the Wisconsin Practice Series. It's basically like a subtitle or a smaller part of that larger collection. So this is a book we use quite a bit for very specific types of inquiries. It's called Elements of an Action, and it provides the basic legal overview, statutes of limitation, and some sample forms or model cases for some frequently asked for things like defamation or malpractice. Fortunately, there are a lot of excellent legal dictionaries online, either free or you can also get them through BadgerLink. They may not be specific necessarily to the law, but they do define a lot of legal terms. I also encourage you, if you are trying to help somebody demystify a term maybe they've come across in court or in their reading, court glossaries can be very helpful for this. The court system interpreter glossaries come in all kinds of languages and are really helpful for people who need to understand or get a really basic definition of a court term. The legislature's site is an easy source of current and past Wisconsin law. I always recommend using the index to find the sections that you need. To find the index, it's a little hard. You go to the statutes related link in that menu near the top, and then get into the index from there. The administrative code works like this too. So if you navigate to the table of contents for the Wisconsin Administrative Code, and you look for the link administrative code related, you'll find a link to a subject index in there. And both subject indexes are pretty nice to use. You can do a very basic keyword search to try and find the topical area. And then you get a nice little table or list of related statutes for that section that can give you a nice little shortcut or help people if they're trying to find out if there is a law on a particular issue and you're not finding something, you can give people that index listing to show, well, I searched here and I couldn't find it. Okay. For people hoping to hire an attorney, we recommend a few things, including just searching the internet, which is sometimes the most disappointing answer to give somebody. There is a legal publisher called Martindale Hubbell that has a website, martindale.com, that does let you search attorneys. You can search by region or city, and you can also search by topic, what their listed specialty is. It's not a comprehensive search, and I'm not 100% convinced that it's always the most current. But it is a good way to pull up a list of attorneys that serve an area and have it be at least somewhat useful or a place for somebody to at least use as a launching point to start contacting attorneys and learn more. There are other legal directory sites like lawyers.com that kind of work the same way. They are commercial but free online directories, and they are not necessarily going to list every attorney in the area. There are two directories that do list every attorney. The State Bar of Wisconsin Lawyer Lookup and the Court System Lawyer Status directories are both online. You cannot search by specialty, however, and that's often the hardest thing for people is to find an attorney who has a specific specialty area. So be aware of that. We will often say start with these more general databases like martindale.com and then check up on the attorney. Check them in the state bar's lawyer lookup, check them in the court system's lawyer status lookup, and see if there are any complaints against them, see if they're listed as an active attorney or a licensed attorney. We also have county organizations both on our website. We have something called County Legal Resources on our website, which is linked here from the homepage, or it's under our legal topics heading as well. And brand new, this debuted last week, Wisconsin Law Help is a similar directory of county level or city level legal aid organizations and clinics. And they've also been adding more legal research, or not legal research articles, but topical articles about specific issues that people may face. So they've started adding information on landlord-tenant issues and consumer issues. So I encourage you to check them out and to refer your users to that as well. Okay, so let's break into family law. Family law is a big portion of the questions that we get. So these can include questions like, I want to get married in France. What do I need to do to make it legal? Or how do I get a divorce? Or I want to see my grandkids. Whenever possible, we try to answer questions with resources that people can find for free online. They just need help finding them or understanding what is a legitimate resource that actually is outlining Wisconsin law. So for restraining orders, and that was something that somebody mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, there are a few helpful sources. So one resource that we use a lot is End Abuse Wisconsin's detailed FAQ on restraining orders. We link to it from our restraining order legal topic page, and it includes pages and pages of restraining order FAQs on all kinds of topics like who's allowed to contact me if there is a restraining order. How do I get it started? How does a restraining order get dropped? It can be a really helpful resource for that. And it does have their chart divided into the different types like domestic abuse, harassment, child abuse, and elder abuse. There are also a lot of places that can help with domestic violence restraining orders throughout Wisconsin. So we always try and connect people to local legal assistance organizations as much as possible. Now, there are limitations to what civil legal aid organizations can do in Wisconsin, but it is a nice option when there's something available to refer people there because it helps them with things like filling out forms or understanding the procedure. It can really reduce that stress of being in a legal scenario for people. So here's another FAQ that we sometimes get. How do I get married in another country? What do I do with the gift, the marriage certificate? I'm going to skip over this just in the interest of time. But I have left this here with all these sources linkable so that you can follow those and get a good idea of the different types of sources that we might use to answer a question that actually are available for free. This slide is hard to read. It is an extremely wordy example of something that we get asked about often. So we'll get asked about how to change or maybe enforce a family court order. It might be about custody, or it might be who gets the kids for the holiday. It could be about changing child support. So in this FAQ, we provide some basic information for people, And we link directly to the forms or guides or other sources to help people find what they need. And in this response, we're almost exclusively referring people towards court system resources. We're really lucky in Wisconsin. We have a fairly robust collection of statewide court forms that are in use all over the state. And these can all be downloaded from the court system's website. We find that often it's helpful to supplement those with county level guides. So there are some guides that we link to here in this question where different counties have created family court handbooks that help demystify the process. And we also will link to on our website checklists for people and other resources like that. There are even some counties that have created packets of forms for their counties that aren't available statewide, but address a fairly common need. And it's always helpful to be able to direct people there and say, well, I'm not finding forms for your county, but I do see that um, Dane County and Waukesha County, for example, have these form packets available for you to take a look at. There's also just a special shout out to the Milwaukee Justice Center. We link to some of their forms videos on our divorce legal research page. They have videos showing how to fill out a lot of these common court forms, and that can be really helpful. We can't tell people how to fill out forms themselves, but we've got these great examples. If people have access to something to watch YouTube, they can watch these videos and at least get an idea of what that looks like. So I like to refer people to our legal topics pages, or like I said, any other law library's legal research guide is a great launching point. The Court Systems Self-Help Law Center is a good place to start for common questions about divorce, and counties put out a lot of great information as well. So let's talk about some sources. So the next three sources are helpful. We refer to them a lot at our libraries. They are also expensive. So I'm just going to mention these just so you can take a look, and then you can dig into these later as you take a look at the slideshow. So Family Law in Wisconsin, Advising Older Clients and Their Families, and Wisconsin Juvenile Law Handbook are three examples of books published by the State Bar of Wisconsin that put out a lot of great information in a fairly readable format on these different topics. They are targeting attorneys as their primary audience, so I always do provide that as a caveat to people. If we're providing information or forms from these books, we'll say, these forms or this information isn't intended for attorneys. You may need to review it and modify it or hire an attorney to work on it for you. Um, but they are helpful for fairly readable overviews. The other end of that spectrum, or the other side of resources that we can provide for people, are these self-help or self-represented legal publisher type of sources. So Nolo has several books that are often kind of useful. They usually help people to generally understand the process. They don't have them specific to Wisconsin law, but they help people to generally understand what it's like to go through divorce. How do I communicate with the other person? Or how do I communicate with the court? How do I represent myself in court in the best way? So here are a couple of examples. You can also find books from other publishers on either specialized topics or general topics. So this book, for example, from ABA Publishing is geared towards attorneys, but it can have some accessible books for everyone. Other lower cost legal publishers, just generally speaking, that also target, I would say, law audiences or law professions are Juris Publishing and James Publishing. And you'll also sometimes find things from academic presses too, although they do tend to be geared towards academics more. And some of these are geared more towards attorneys. So these books could potentially be books that you try and ILL instead of buy. Okay, so not seeing any questions in the chat so far. I'm going to dive right into housing and landlord law. We get a lot of questions about rental law, and looking at the comments at the beginning of this webinar, so do you. We're actually pretty consistent in the sources that we use to answer, and I'll go over those today. So some of the questions can be easily answered by using the Court Systems Guide to Filing an Eviction. That is available on the court website. You can also find it linked on our landlord-tenant law page. That can quickly get complicated, so then we move on to other sources. One source we often include is from this organization in Dane County. They have a lot of topical articles on their website. We refer people from all over to the Tenant Resource Center because they tend to cite to the law throughout their website. They've got a lot of articles and blog posts and some charts, and that can help people use those law references as a launching point to check what the current law is, read it online for themselves, or maybe get some direction about what the next steps could be for filing a complaint or getting help locally. Other online sources that we link to from our landlord-tenant page include the Bureau of Consumer Protection, which is the state agency that handles complaints about rentals. They have a few guides on their website, not mentioned here on this slide, but linked on our research page as well. Legal Action of Wisconsin has what they call Tenant Sourcebook, and Wisconsin Law Help, that new website that just debuted last week, also have rental rights information that try and guide people towards how to handle or respond to common rental issues and how to document information in some cases as well. People often need a state-specific form for things. This can be easy if it's a form the court system has created and put online, like the forms for filing a small claims action, which is where an eviction would be filed in a small claims court. It can be tough, though, if a government entity has not made a form available. So the first place we check for commercially published forms are either state practice materials published by the State Bar of Wisconsin or similar, or other legal publishers that we may have in our collection. Sometimes there are also forms within the statutes, either close to the court rules or as a statute itself. If you can't find the forms that you need, you may have to rely on more generic forms, which are often forms that are included in things like self-help legal books, big legal form databases or directories, or some of our larger legal treatises, or some of those things that I was talking about earlier, like a big legal encyclopedia. We have a legal forms page on our website, available from this legal topics dropdown, that kind of walks people through a little bit of that process of finding different sources for forms. For books, our most used source is this book published by the State Bar of Wisconsin. It's a fairly recent addition to the book market. It is, I believe, currently a new edition comes out maybe every 1 to 2 years. And it includes a helpful overview of some common tenancy problems. It also has sample forms that landlords or property owners often need, like eviction notice forms. Another aspect of housing law that we run into includes neighbor disputes between adjacent property owners. This is actually one area of the law where there's often not a lot of guidance. So noise complaints might require a look at local codes. Fence complaints can fall under both state and local law. And we also find that there aren't a lot of resources published by state publishers like the State Bar of Wisconsin or something like that that really pick out and explain a lot of these neighbor law issues. So for our purposes, we link to a variety of online sources, but we also use this NOLO book, Neighbor Law, quite a bit. And this book is an interesting source because it is actually sometimes our best book for most people. It's not specific to Wisconsin law. Maybe it has a few case citations to Wisconsin cases, but we don't know of a better Wisconsin specific option. Because neighbor disputes are often rooted in court cases, this general guide is just as effective sometimes for people because it gives an overview of the issues and it gives people some actionable steps to try and take when resolving a neighbor problem. Estate planning and wills. We get a lot of questions on this. It's another very broad area. You might get somebody who's trying to manage the estate of somebody who's passed away. You might get somebody who's just trying to do some estate planning for themselves. Maybe they're looking for power of attorney for health care, or they're trying to write a will. In Wisconsin statutes, as I mentioned before, you'll sometimes come across what we call a statutory form, which means that the form language and the loose formatting is included in the actual statute. So some of these statutory forms have been made available online as a fillable document. So some frequently used examples, especially for estate planning, are power of attorney forms or what's called a living will, which are available through the Wisconsin Department of Health. Other forms like the Wisconsin Basic Will, which is linked here on this slide, or the Wisconsin Basic Will with Trust have not been converted to a fillable PDF form or Word document by a government entity in Wisconsin. So, what do you do when somebody comes up and says, I have this will I found online. Is it legal? Well, you can't make that judgment call for them. What you can do is refer people to two types of sources. So we do refer people to the statute language for the Wisconsin Basic Will and the Basic Will with Trust so that they can compare the two if maybe the source they are looking at claims that it's the Wisconsin Basic Will. We also have form books in our library that have sample wills. So we can say, here are some other examples of wills that you can take a look at and learn a little bit more about and make your own judgment call about what it is you're looking at. There are a lot of online sources for probate issues. Estate planning, end of life, or healthcare planning and handling property after somebody dies are all big areas of research. The Wisconsin Register and Probate Association is an organization that we link to a lot. They have something called a self-represented, um, uh, it's a guide for personal representatives. Sorry about that. A guide for personal representatives of estates and informal probate administration. And it's a great source for people who are just trying to handle a loved one's small estate in court. They just need to figure out what to do. The Department of Health Services is a great resource for power of attorney. The court system has forms and county level checklists that can be useful. And on this next slide, I wanted to do a special call out for this UW Extension resource, Family Estate Planning in Wisconsin. It is a free publication that gives a really good overview of common questions that people have about all kinds of estate planning issues, about will creation, about end of life planning. It's a great resource for that. And they also have expanded this into a larger workshop series that you can learn more about on their website, which helps people plan their estate in more of a workbook style too. The next books are again higher cost options, but we do use them a lot here at our libraries. And I'm just going to go through these. You can obviously look at these later at your leisure. Eckhart's workbook for Wisconsin estate planners, I want to call out especially because they do have some sample wills and different types of wills. So when people find, for example, the Wisconsin Basic Will, and they want to know what else is out there, this is a helpful resource to show some other variations on how wills might be created. Death in Wisconsin is one of those titles that's part of the Wisconsin Practice Series. It's part of one of those big legal encyclopedia sets, but you can buy it separately. And it has a lot of information about things that happen after death, including issues with wills, including funerals and cemeteries. A lot of NOLA books can fill those general reader needs as well. They're not specific to Wisconsin law either, but they guide people through the planning process. So people can use this to create a general plan and then dive into Wisconsin specific resources as needed. We have a variety of Wisconsin will books in our collection, some of which are quite old. So if you're evaluating a book on wills or estate planning or really any other small press book that you're thinking about adding to your collection, here are some things to evaluate it on. So, currency obviously is a big issue in a lot of reference materials, and certainly with the law as well. As the law changes over the years, books can fall out of date, and the content can become dangerously out of date, depending on what the topic is. So, when you're evaluating books, look at the currency of it, look at its location focus. There are some resources where it really is helpful to have a Wisconsin specific source, but other topics you really can get by pretty okay with something more general that you might get from a NOLO store. You can also look at the reputation of the author, and also how readable it's going to be. Some bar association press materials might be a little more dense, or they might use a lot more legalese because they're not trying to target a self-represented audience. Consumer law is a very broad area, so we're just going to skim the surface today with a couple of examples. For finding sources on consumer issues, you can obviously start with a legal research guide. That's always one way to do it. The Department of Agriculture, Trade, and Consumer Protection can be a great place to start. For a lot of consumer issues, there are other agencies, of course, that will come into play. Wisconsin.gov does have a tool to let you try and search for the appropriate agency. If you do some keyword searching, you can sometimes hit across the right agency for complaints or guides that way as well. And of course, there are federal resources as well, including the Federal Trade Commission and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. National Consumer Law Center is one example of a publisher that has books on a variety of consumer topics. I would say they do tend to be a little dense in terms of how they examine and talk about different issues, but they do have some helpful books and helpful information on kind of the thornier issues in consumer law. Bankruptcy sources. One person mentioned bankruptcy as a topic that they get asked about a fair amount. We linked to some information on our bankruptcy legal topic page. I would say one nice thing about bankruptcy research is that bankruptcy cases happen in federal court, which means that the resources that are published, like if you get a book that's published by Nolo, you don't have to worry about it being specific to Wisconsin. Instead, the overviews of Chapter 7 bankruptcy or Chapter 13 bankruptcy are something that is more widely applicable to somebody in Wisconsin and somebody in Indiana versus another book that might be a little bit more tailored to, for example, Wisconsin divorce law. So NOLO books on that topic can actually be helpful. They can give good overviews on how property is handled, like things like cars, are handled during bankruptcy. And then the Eastern and Western District also have information for pro se litigants on their website that talk a little bit about that. One of them has a help desk as well. I believe the Eastern District Court has a help desk for people to ask questions. Here are just a few examples of the range of consumer-related questions you might get and some resources for answering them. I'm just going to leave these on here for you to be able to review at the end of this. But when we're talking about consumer law, really we're running into a lot of questions that can span a lot of areas. So it could be a question where you are searching for state statutes and you're also searching for local ordinances and you're helping people connect to local government agencies or licensing or things like that. So sometimes helping people with consumer issues can bounce you around quite a bit. Another example is something like insurance law, where there is an agency actually in Wisconsin called the Office of Commissioner of Insurance that has a lot of information on their site and a complaint process specifically to them as well. So just some other examples. These are all linkable so you can see the types of information and the ways that we tend to respond to some of these questions. I do always try and help people connect to other resources, either for complaints or for asking questions or for getting legal help, which I recognize in some areas of the state is awfully hard to find. For courts and trials, there are a lot of resources too, so many broad topics to research. The Wisconsin Jury Instructions is a project that was brought online onto the Wisconsin State Law Library's website a handful of years ago now. Those can be helpful for navigating or understanding certain specific issues in civil, juvenile, or criminal law. There are also a lot of court rules online. There are a lot of ways you can search for court opinions online. We're always happy to help people find free options for these. We do in our libraries have specific databases for legal research or court opinion research. But we recognize for members of the public, it's a lot more tricky. So we will often refer people to a free source like Google Scholar, which lets you do some specific Wisconsin case law searching. We also do try and gather up a lot of local county guides and forms because we find that those can be really great resources. The FAQs that a county agency puts on their website because they've just been asked it so many times might be exactly the language that you need to respond to somebody who is maybe in your area who needs that help. So we always encourage people to do some digging into other county resources too. I still frequently use the Google hack. I guess it's not quite a hack, but to search for specifically government websites, um, searching those kind of topics or different legal topics on government websites can give you some of these great county guides and FAQs that can answer some of your questions. So I do have some examples here as well about how we respond to questions. And it can be tricky. When people are representing themselves in court, it's not really something that we can definitively determine for people. What should you do next? We answer in more generalist terms. Here is how a motion is filed. Here's where you can learn more about motions. Here's how a summons and complaint is filed. Here's how you can learn more about summons and complaints. And we can use the standard court system forms and guides for that. For large claim complaints, it can be a little harder though. For a large claim complaint, that's something that is not small claims, it's over 10,000 for money judgment, or there are some specific money limits for personal injuries and things like that as well. That's a harder thing because there really aren't any statewide court system guides to help people navigate a large claims civil case. For that, we refer to this book quite a bit. The Civil Litigation Forms Manual has a lot of sample forms on their in their book and a lot of really basic, fast information about the different types of court actions that might happen in a civil case, including quick summaries of timelines or deadlines that might be set in the statutes. So it's a very general resource. It's not specific to a particular type of action, but it can be helpful to kind of demystify how to write your own court filings sometimes. It is geared towards attorneys, however, and that is a caveat that I will always include if I'm ever sharing a part of this book with somebody, is that it is something that is geared towards attorneys. The forms are included as samples, and it needs to be evaluated by the individual directly. So Nolo also has some books in that general genre as well. Representing Yourself in Court is one example of that, where it just gives basic overviews of how to respond or how to interface with the court system. Statutes of limitations, that's a tricky area. I just included these slides in here for future reference, but if you have any questions about how to find statutes of limitations, certainly reach out anytime after this webinar as well. So here's just one sample question and answer about statutes of limitations and small claims cases, which is one of our most common statutes of limitation questions. So some different sources for court rules and procedure, some of which are online, some of which are commercially printed and available. And for criminal law, prisons, and probation, there are a lot of resources there as well. I would say one of the big areas that there are both a lot of questions about and more resources on are topics like expungement. So in this example, I did want to draw attention to different expungement sources and also say that anytime I help somebody with an expungement question, I am also referring them to Lift Wisconsin or another local legal clinic that might be able to help with that. Um, and I'm seeing a question in the chat. This is a fantastic question. So, advice on how to work with patrons who are expecting more than we can professionally or feasibly give. Um, so I have some resources on this. First of all, we've got at the beginning of this slide or this slideshow, I have our legal research page linked from our website. And I have given some talks in the past about legal reference services and how to provide legal reference. Some of the ways to do this um, are to try and give some basic information, plus one or more useful sources. People get overwhelmed very easily. They may ask you what is right, or if they've got a form in front of them, for example, they might ask you, how do I fill this out? I do find myself saying very often in sort of a broken record format, I'm not an attorney. I can't advise you. I can't tell you how to fill this out. I can help you find information. I can help you find examples. I can help you find definitions. Sometimes people just want to know what is a plaintiff? What's a defendant? Um, so we do try and break down questions into something that we can answer. And I don't think I have quite enough time to really give a great overview of that, but we do have on that resource on our website. We've got some examples of phrases to use and phrases to avoid. Things to avoid, for example, would be, I think you should do this. I think that you should do X. Phrases to use would be the law states the law says this, and here are some other resources for you to learn about it. Um, Part of our regular work when we're answering a legal reference question is anticipatory. They may not be asking for legal clinics, but we do try and connect them to help in their area. We do also use a disclaimer, both verbally and in our written answers, so that people are aware that we are librarians and we cannot give legal advice. So the rest of the sources on here, this is just for your reference. Criminal law is a big area. The Criminal Defense Manual, which is listed here, is one of the sources or print sources that we use quite a lot for people who are trying to represent themselves because it has sample forms and it has sample motions and it talks about sentencing. But of course, it is one of those pricier resources. There are some as well. Section 1983 is sometimes a topic that people would like to research, and because it's federal law, it's usually easier to find in a cheaper publisher from a cheaper publisher or from a standalone book that's available throughout the US. Okay. In the last couple of minutes, are there any other questions that I can answer?
Thank you, Carol. One of the other questions that came in, and I think you touched on it just a little bit on that last question, was that a lot of the books, of course, were expensive and out of some tiny libraries' budgets. So, are there, other than NOLO books, are there other publishers that you know of that would be more reasonable and potentially in a library's budget?
Yeah, so James Publishing and Juris Publishing are two publishers that tend to not be as expensive as something like West, Thomson Reuters, or Lexis, or some of those bigger legal publishers. And the tricky thing about that is, again, those are geared towards attorneys, and sometimes they can be on really specific topics that are just not appropriate for your collection. Academic presses, university presses can sometimes be good sources, as well as small presses. I've seen topics on things like how to write your will from a small press, whereas finding something like that from something like the State Bar is going to be a lot more. Um, for those, for example, in our collection, we've got a good bank of those types of books from small presses. The problem with those is that they are not necessarily frequently updated. So you can sometimes run into trouble there where it was just published once by the author and then it's just been years or decades.
Right.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you mentioned earlier with the library card and also contacting you if there are like pages out of a book that might be
hmm
an option instead of, purchasing the entire State Bar book,
Absolutely.
whatever.
Yes. Yes. We help people every day with requests like that where we obviously can't provide big chunks of books because of the law, but
Mhm.
we can provide some information. We can provide sample forms, and those can be really helpful to get people started.
Right. Well, that takes us right to 3:30. So that was perfect timing on your part, Carol.
I
Thank
try
you.
not to talk over, but it happened. So we
No,
did it.
you did good.
And
um,
I want to encourage just one more thing.
sure,
Reach out to me anytime. Reach out to our reference email or phone anytime. We're always happy to help people.
they are, and I will second to that. I've been working with the state law library. I think even back when I was at Sun Prairie, and I think you did like there was a program like I want to say it was legal reference in a nutshell or something like that.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
that was where I first learned about all of the amazing stuff that you have on your website. So thank you for all of that great work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Carol, for that great session. There will be a short survey that will pop up as I close the webinar or as you leave. Just know that we've been having a few little technical issues with the survey. It will get connected to this webinar, but the title might be different. There were some Zoom issues with the survey. So just know that we will get your feedback and we appreciate it. This was our last session for today. We will begin again tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with tracks in internal communications and small libraries. You can still register for these sessions at our Wild Wisconsin website. So thank you all for joining us and have a great rest of your day.